Hello, I'm Gaston Gosselin, the Collage New Music Fellow for the 25-26 season, and today I'm joined by Nina Young, who will be having her piece Rising Tide performed at our upcoming concert on September 28th. Nina, welcome.
Hi, Getson. Thank you so much for chatting.
Yeah, and thank you so much for making time to talk to us about your piece and your philosophies in general. Rising Tide, looking at some of the influences from it, it looks like it's very heavily influenced from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Can you tell us a little bit about that and just some other thoughts about the piece that you've had?
Yeah, sure. I think heavily would be, I don't know how heavily it's influenced. The piece was commissioned in 2014 and I finished it in 2015 for the Milan Expo, so like the current World's Fair, for one of the pavilions there. um, and by the Divertimento Ensemble. And we had to follow something to do with the theme of the expo, which was called Feeding the Earth Energy for Life or something. That's like a loose memory of what that was. Um, and I was thinking about how can that fit in with my own musical interests, and perhaps my own interests about the world and the environment as a very loose inspiration for writing the piece. And I was really thinking at the time about a lot of the changes that were happening in the world, both social and political, as well as environmental, and what kind of feelings those bring upon us. So this piece is kind of a reaction to that. And I was wondering, like, is this really unique to this time, or is this something that universally continues for forever? Like, have all societies been dealing with this? And I was leafing through Shakespeare at the time, and I came across this line from Julius Caesar, which I'll read right now, which I thought really it made me feel the same way that I did at that moment in time, and frankly, I do right now. And it gave me comfort to know that this is universal. And I thought, okay, I can write a piece that's like an emotional reaction to these feelings. So the text reads, "There's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves or lose our ventures." So you have the idea that you're sitting on the threshold of something and one has to make a choice about how to react. Um, to this and this feeling of overwhelming rising and what one's going to do afterwards. So I was thinking about, sea levels and that kind of thing, but thinking about this idea of how do we take something quite passive and relaxed and build up these waves and waves of emotions in the music, and then eradicate them all, and then what is left behind. And that kind of follows the form of the piece.
Yeah, and you were mentioning these incoming tides and these wave-like textures, and that's such a pretty stark thing you notice in the piece is just how everything kind of culminates in these wave-like motions and then dissipates from there and just kind of more or less does a lot of that like over and over again with varying different textures. Explain, can you describe to us a little what your process was like and kind of culminating these textures and these soundscapes that you created?
Absolutely. Towards, I guess, like the climax, if you would even call that, at the piece, happens, I guess, about three-quarters of the way through before we have this really, or halfway through really, before we have this really big break with these noisy textures that delineate the form into another world. And I was thinking about how something rather nascent and delicate, when we think about the ebb and flow, the push and pull of waves of gravitation of our feelings, these little things can actually pull a lot of energy. So they don't resolve right away, but they build and they build and they build until finally everything crashes over. So I was thinking about that very visceral gesture, in the texture of the music, and how I can create that through the idea of these builds that kind of go nowhere but back and circulate back upon themselves. That's like a feature that I think I use in a lot of my music, setting up these expectations and then sort of tumbling into the inevitable something else that's hiding underneath them. I was also really interested in just color in this piece. So there's a lot of play between string harmonics and different sounds in the woodwinds, going between harmonics and the piano, and really thinking about the language that's emerging out of all of these, including extremely delicate sounds, and then direct on noise, where I'm asking the ensemble to just really make this stark, crunchy, crazy sort of sound to break the texture. So thinking about the entire sort of musical spectrum everywhere inside of that. The music is also has moments of like really lyrical romanticism in individual lines. And that was something that I wanted to imbue in the music to give it this very kind of, I guess, human emotion. Um, and from outside of the project of the piece, but the idea of the ensemble being a tutti whole of sound, but also comprised of individual virtuosos who each get their little moments in the sun.
Yeah, that's a you touched on so many subjects of just creating room for like a very like unique kind of group sound that's just kind of a culmination of a lot of individual soloistic sounds, which I think is so kind of indicative of like what the sea is and everything and how even the sea creates those textures. And I think on you're on record in a few other interviews of also making a lot of um, parallels to the sea, like in nautical writings and things like that. Can would you say that you're pretty often influenced by just the world of nature and the sea in that sense?
Um, I think as an artist, you go around the world and everything that you see all the time is part of this giant project of seeing and reacting and feeling and discovering. And yes, I do have an affinity for the water and things maritime. I like maritime literature. I studied ocean engineering in my undergrad. I really like boats. I like sailing. I like octopuses and all the things under the water. And my kid thinks she's a mermaid. So yeah, so the sea and all of its fantastical mythological aspects and its really concrete tactile, like real life environmental aspects and everything in between. I think it's just like a really beautiful, amazing force in on Earth. And yeah, I guess I am inspired by it. I don't think my music sounds like the water. I'm not trying to make music that sounds like the sea, but I think as a composer, it's like, where do you start on a blank page? And oftentimes I construct myself a series of metaphors or ideas to at least create a structure that I can build music upon, almost like a scaffold. And when I take the scaffolding away, I know what the scaffolding is, but I don't necessarily need anybody else to understand the scaffolding, but it allows the music to have a form and to develop.
Very cool, very cool. And well, last question before I let you go. What are you hoping that the audience takes away from your piece as it's presented to, varying audiences throughout the years?
I think I'm interested in the idea of this feeling of being overwhelmed, and then the resolution that can come after trying to find peace in the chaos. The ending of this piece is extremely quiet and soft and subdued. It's just layering of several pitches over and over again. And I hope that that contrast between like the wild emotions and then what can happen in this kind of more subdued aftermath is heard. And there's another funny, like, cool thing about the pizza. It has two ebows inside that play
Yeah,
two secret pitches that we hear the entire time. And I viewed those as these consistent sort of light beams or material that continues throughout the piece no matter what happens. And sometimes we hear it and sometimes we don't. And in the end, I think it becomes really exposed. Um, and so this idea of that no matter what happens, to us in our lives, there's always continuity somewhere underneath it all.
fantastic. Nina, thank you so much for joining me today. And for everyone else, I hope we all see you at the Collage New Music concert coming up on September 28th at Longy School of Music. Nina, thank you again.
Thank you so much.